Our Zen practice derives from the experience of Shakyamuni Buddha as he was awakened to the reality of the interconnectedness of everything in the universe. And he realized that he embodied that entire universe, this entire universe in its interconnectedness in this very body. That expression, of course, is an expression that comes through the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, which tried to articulate that awakening experience of the Buddha in different ways. And Zen is one of them. And a basic understanding or a basic premise of Zen is that that experience can never be expressed in words. It is beyond all language, it is beyond all concepts. And yet it is what can really fill our hearts. The longing in the human heart can never be filled by anything less than what is infinite and what is boundless. And so the expression that all beings are endowed with Buddha nature is not so much taking Buddha nature as something out there that we are endowed with, but it is simply a use of words to indicate that we are all born to that reality of infinite and boundless interconnectedness, and to realize who we are is to awaken to that. So it can be expressed in different ways. The various religions have also noted or have also come from the experience of human beings who felt that this finite realm that we see that begins in birth and goes on through growing up, getting old, getting sick and dying is not the whole of reality. And so that search of the human heart for something that will anchor us in this very impermanent life is at the heart of the various religious traditions. And so the various traditions have had different expressions of that reality in as experienced by those sages in those traditions. In the Hindu tradition, it's called Brahman, or many other names for Brahman, and so on. And in the Christian tradition, it is referred to as the term God, and specifically the triune God, the triune mystery in the Christian tradition. But these are simply words to point to that reality that is basically beyond name and form. So what I would like to offer today is an entry point into that place that is beyond name and form through following the life and some writings of a giant in the Christian tradition, Saint Augustine, taking what he wrote and also against the background of his life as ways for us to deepen in our own Zen practice and see that what he is talking about really also refers to us. Now, this is not going to be a theological exposition of Augustine. It's not an interpretation of Augustine, excuse me, but taking Augustine as a pointer for our Zen practice. So this is what I'd like to offer for today's talk, to help us in awakening to and confirming and embodying that infinite and boundless reality of who we are as we realize our interconnectedness with everyone in this universe. That therefore generates the wisdom of seeing things with equanimity, but also the compassion that enables us to give our lives back to the world towards its healing. There's so much pain and suffering in the world right now. If you just open your eyes and look around, that will hit you like a big, like a sledgehammer, that pain and suffering of the world. So the question that comes in each of our hearts is, how can we help in healing this pain and suffering of this world that we live in? And the hint that our Zen practice offers to us is, first, find that root in you, find that source in you that enables you to realize your interconnectedness with everything that's going on in the world. And from there, things will flow in the most natural way if you are really continuing to cultivate that awareness of that interconnectedness. So we are taking Augustine as our pointer today. Augustine was born in 354, and that was in North Africa. He was a talented and ambitious young man, and he was already recognized for his talent. He was winning honors in imperial elocution contests and so on, and he also was very ambitious himself. Now, at the age of 18, he came upon a book of Cicero, which had been lost, unfortunately, but the title of that book, which he himself refers to, is Hortensius. And in that book, he read a passage that said that it is not in physical pursuits of food and drink and pleasures and sex and also of power and so on that the human heart is satisfied, but only in the discovery of truth that is beyond time and space. It's only in the discovery of truth that the human heart is truly satisfied. So that somehow captivated him. So he began his search. But in the meantime, he also was beleaguered by his own passions and by his own ambition. So a teenager and then going on to the 20s, he had a very tumultuous life, seeking glory and yet also seeking pleasure and so on. He lived with someone who he did not intend to marry, apparently, and they had a son. And then he continued his pursuits of fame and glory and so on, until at some point in his early 30s, he was struck by the fact that he was just making himself more and more unhappy. And so at that time, there were inner rumblings that led him to look at the Bible, the Latin Bible of the time. And when he opened scriptures, he came upon a passage that really jolted him, and that precipitated, or rather that triggered his resolve to now follow that path of discovering that truth. So, and that is his life in the first half. So since then, he then became a very faithful follower of the Catholic faith, to the point that he then became a priest. Then he was also appointed bishop. He became a leader of a Christian community in North Africa at that time. And from then, he also wrote many books, many treatises, and gave very eloquent sermons about the Christian faith, the bulk of which is preserved and which constitutes a major resource for Christian, specifically Catholic, teaching on almost everything. So Augustine stands as a great pillar of the Catholic Church and of the Christian tradition, together with the giants like Thomas Aquinas and a few others you could name. So in any case, this is what Augustine is. But we're not so much going into his theology or his teaching, but into his own search. And for that, he wrote a book, or he wrote his own journey in a well-known treatise now called the Confessions. So I'd like to just cite 3 passages from the Confessions as our jumping point, as our launching pad to enter into our own search for awakening, the search for our true self. So in the beginning, in the very opening lines of his Confessions, he acknowledges that he is before an indescribable and infinite reality that, of course, is called God in the Christian tradition. So he addresses that infinite reality, saying that You are highly to be praised. Great is your power and your wisdom is immeasurable. And then going further, you stir human beings to take pleasure in praising you because you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. So that is the point I'd like to zero in for now. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Now, this heart of ours, as we have kept saying, is made for nothing less than the realization of that infinite and boundless reality that makes us who we are. And it is given specific conceptual and linguistic expressions in the different traditions, and in the Christian tradition, for Augustine, it is the God of the triune mystery that he is addressing in this. But whether you believe in that or not, or whether you use that language or not, just take Augustine as telling us about our own inner restlessness. What can truly give us joy, and what can truly give us peace, and what can truly satisfy our human hearts is nothing less than that infinite reality that is described in different ways. It's infinite light, infinite love, infinite life, and nothing short of that will satisfy our human heart. So that is the starting point that I'd like to offer for our practice. Namely, we are here not to attain some achievement like relieving ourselves from stress so that we can work better, or finding peace in our hearts so that we will be able to get through the turmoil of the world and so on. It is not just that, but it is something that is propelled by, sparked by that infinite longing in each of us to realize our true self. So note that this is nothing less than the quest for the infinite. So as we sit here and breathe in and breathe out and allow our mind to just settle in the here and now, do not think that you are, by doing that, covering yourself or protecting yourself, shielding yourself from the rest of the world in turmoil, and finding a haven of peace in this breath, here and now, breathing in and breathing out, and shutting out the rest of the world. Not at all. In sitting here precisely and breathing in and breathing out, we are invited to open our hearts and realize that in opening our hearts, we cannot but realize our interconnectedness with that concrete reality that is happening in the world, and that it goes beyond that, so that it's not an act of isolation to sit in Zen, but an act of plunging ourselves into the heart of the world, right there at its fulcrum. And in arriving at that place of stillness, where we will find contentment and peace and joy, we will also be able to see that that peace and contentment and joy that we discover there is what we are called to give back to the world as our gift to the world, because the world is precisely no other than us. That world that is languishing in suffering and pain is me. That is my suffering. That's what we will discover. And so, anyway, going back to Augustine, it was his inner restlessness that led him to continue searching. So again, jumping through many passages and through many stages of his life, I would like to note another passage that he gives, whereby we can also get a hint as to what we are looking for in our Zen practice. In the third book of the Confessions, he notes that, again, addressing that infinite and boundless reality beyond names and beyond form and beyond concepts, that is the triune mystery in the Christian tradition, he addresses that reality saying, "You are more inward to me than my most inward part, and higher than the highest element in me. In short, you are more intimate to me than I am to myself. and yet you are also higher and bigger than anything I can ever imagine. So those two movements, that innermost core of who we are, that's where we can find that infinite and boundless reality. And precisely in doing so, it's not something that we can confine just within ourselves, but it is precisely what takes us beyond our little selves and allows us to reach that infinite and boundless reality. And we know that those two opposite concepts, the innermost core of our being, and then the infinite and boundless reality that embraces everything in the universe, come together in that one point that we are invited to touch and arrive at and find our home in and be one with and embody in our very being, with every breath, at every moment, with every step, with every standing up, sitting down, and so on in our day-to-day life. So that reality that we are looking for is not just something out there that we're seeking, going out of ourselves. It is precisely in going to the innermost core of who we are, wherein that reality can be discovered. And that is also a very basic guideline of our Zen practice. Don't do anything, just sit there. As we sit here, then again, repeatedly, you have heard these invitations and guidelines. Allow your posture to lead you to that stillness. Allow your breath to just be breathed so that it is the breath who is holding you. Breathe in, breathe out, and just let your mind rest on that breath. And as you do so, just enter into that deep, deep stillness. Your thoughts come up, just notice them and bring it back to the breath. Continue in that deep stillness with your heart open, with your eyes and ears open, with your whole being open to the universe. And that is the location, that is the fulcrum from which you can move the universe. We know from our high school math or even middle school math about Archimedes, the person who made all of these mathematical discoveries, who said that if you give me a fulcrum and a place to stand, I can move the world. Namely, finding that place wherein the whole world is centered, then if I am at that place, then I am the world and I can move the world as I wish towards its well-being, towards its healing. So it is that fulcrum, the still point of the universe, using T.S. Eliot's words, where we are invited to arrive at and find our home in. And there we will find ourselves beyond separation from each and everything else. So Augustine gives us that hint that it is in the innermost core of our being where we can find that infinite reality. And yet we know that it is beyond anything we can ever imagine. That's why it's not just confined to this or that term. It is not a monopoly of any one religious tradition. As we heard from a previous talk, it does not even have to be in the Zen tradition, nor even a religious tradition. It does not even have to be something beautiful or grand and amazing immediately, but it can be the most ordinary of things that can trigger us to that awakening, that reality. And so, given that, then we are invited to continue to keep our hearts open and know that these day-to-day realities that we encounter in our own home, or as we go out, as we meet people in the streets, or as we look at the sky, we look at the pebbles, or as we look at this world with all of its pain and its struggles, as we engage in the world's pain and struggles, those experiences can also be the gateway the gateway to that place where we will find that peace and joy and a source of thanks. Now, let me also cite another passage, another incident in Augustine's own life, where he was with his mother who was about to die. His mother is the one who had really been his spiritual influence in his life. His mother, Monica, had been praying for him and had been giving him guidelines so that he would get away from his profligate ways and find his true peace and joy in the true path. And so finally her prayer was granted when Augustine himself became converted and now lived in the light of that faith that enabled him to really be more at peace with himself and be able to cultivate the virtues of being someone with an open heart. Now, it was at that point where his mother was about to die. He knew that it was a moment close to that. And so he was having a conversation with her. And he relates that conversation with her in this way. Again, they were talking about spiritual things. By the way, when I use the word spiritual, please do not imagine a realm that is separate from our concrete physical reality, notwithstanding the different expressions that you may be reading. But the word spiritual is precisely what refers to that innermost core of our being that enables our entire being to be really seen in true light. That innermost core of our being out of which we can see things in true light, the spiritual. So they were talking about such things, and so he was right. So he writes in the 9th book of Confessions, our minds were lifted up by an ardent affection toward eternal being itself. So they were talking about things, and so they were also uplifted. They felt that joy, they felt that excitement, they felt that enthusiasm for what is eternal. We moved up beyond all of these physical objects, as he said, and attain, so as to attain the region of inexhaustible abundance, where you feed Israel eternally with truth for food. So he's alluding to Israel, the people of God, who are fed by God's inexhaustible riches. So he's saying the source of inexhaustible riches is in that place of inexhaustible abundance. Their life is the wisdom by which all creatures come into being, both things which were and will be. But wisdom itself is not brought into being, but it is as it was and always will be. And then what I'd like to emphasize, furthermore, in this wisdom, there is no past and future, but only being, since it is eternal. That rather than getting lost in conceptual interpretations, I'd like to just focus on that last sentence. In this wisdom, the wisdom that we also are seeking, the wisdom of seeing our true self, the wisdom of seeing things as they are, there is no past and future, but only being, since it is eternal. So when we are sitting here, breathing in and breathing out, and as we allow that stillness to reign, then we arrive at the place where our subjective consciousness and the objective world outside are no longer separate. And when they merge, we arrive at that place that is not flowing in time from past to present to future, but only being, just being right here, right now. In Latin, the word is a very dynamic way of saying esse, to be. So that reality of just to be. And when I arrive at that to be, as I look around me, everything is just as itself, also just being what itself. to be, also everything bees. And as I arrive at that place of to be, that eternal being that they're talking about, we see that there is no separation between what I am and what everything else in the universe is all about. So in their conversation, they both glimpse that beyond time and space, this eternal being. And that is also what we are invited to arrive at, experience, and embody in Zen. And from the standpoint of that timeless and boundless being, then we see the world and allow the inexhaustible riches coming from that place to be given to the world through us, having been or having arrived there and being fully grounded there. Now, what does all of that do? What has all of that to do with our Zen practice? Again, if you recognize what I'm trying to point to, our Zen practice is an invitation to come to that point of stillness that does not isolate us, but precisely connects us with everything. And in connecting us with everything, it connects us with the world as our own reality, and thereby invites us to give our little selves to our big self that is now hurting so much, so that we can be an instrument of healing in this broken world. So let us find that point of inner peace and joy in arriving at that fulcrum by which we can move the world. And then from there, allow this little fumbling, mortal and fallible and wounded being that is myself to be given back to the world as a gift out of the inexhaustible riches of that place beyond thought and beyond words. That is awakening to the reality of who I am. When we ask, who am I? It is not just about this individual personality that we are talking about, but that which constitutes the innermost core of who I am, that allows me to really realize that I am not separate from anything, and realizing that non-separateness is what enables me to really rejoice, celebrate, but also join in the pain and suffering and give myself back to the world as my gift coming from all of that inexhaustible source that I'm receiving, and with gratitude live my life in the best way I can to the end of my days. Again, beyond time and space. So we have already had a foretaste of that eternal when we come to that place. And so we will not be worried about what will happen after our death, because we have had a foretaste of that, a glimpse of that, and we know all shall be well. All manner of things shall be well. Let us come back to our stillness and thank Augustine for his tips on coming back to that point of stillness and allowing ourselves to really become who we are.
Boundless compassion, absorbing ourselves awakened suffering. This Buddha, the source of compassion, this Buddha receives only compassion. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, just compassion. The pure heart always rejoices. In the light we call this, in the dark we call this. Moment after moment, the the true heart arises. Time after time there is nothing but this. Absorbing yourselves awakens a Buddha right here. This Buddha, the source of compassion. This Buddha receives only compassion. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, just compassion. Thus the pure heart always rejoices. In the light we call it, in the dark we call it. Moment after moment, the true heart arises. Time after time, there is nothing but this. Absorbing yourselves awakens a Buddha right here. This Buddha, the source of compassion. This Buddha receives only compassion. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, just compassion. Thus the pure heart always rejoices. In the light we call it, in the dark we call it. Moment after moment, the true heart arises. Time after time, there is nothing but this.